I stood in the empty living room of my Westchester home, surrounded by boxes that contained the remnants of 25 years. At 53, I never imagined I'd be dismantling the life Charlie and I had built together, piece by careful piece. The house sale would be final in 3 days. I'd already signed the papers, already found a small apartment in town, something I could manage on Charlie's modest life insurance and my part-time income. It wasn't what we'd planned for our golden years, but plans had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Charlie had been gone for 8 months. 2 years of fighting cancer had ended on a rainy Tuesday morning, his hand growing cold in mine as machines flatlined around us. The medical bills had consumed our savings, but I'd have spent every penny twice over for one more day with him. Our 3 children had processed his death differently. Jacob, 30, had always been my dreamer, full of grand schemes and infectious optimism. Even as a child, he'd believed he could build castles from sand that would never wash away. His latest obsession was cryptocurrency, something he couldn't quite explain, but insisted would revolutionize everything. Jonathan, 29, was my practical son, the one who'd helped neighbors with their taxes since high school. He'd become a financial advisor, always perfectly dressed, always speaking in careful, professional tones. Since Charlie's diagnosis, he'd grown distant, citing ethical boundaries whenever I needed help understanding our insurance maze. Rebecca, my baby at 28, had inherited Charlie's charm and my stubborn streak. She'd always been drawn to beautiful things, expensive tastes that I'd indulged perhaps too much. Lately, she'd been building what she called her brand. On social media, 30,000 followers who hung on her every carefully curated post about lifestyle and authenticity. But something had shifted after Charlie's illness began. The children who once gathered for Sunday dinners now had endless excuses. Phone calls grew shorter, visits more infrequent. When they did come, conversations felt performative, as if they were checking boxes rather than connecting. I told myself it was grief. People process loss differently, and maybe they needed space to mourn their father. Maybe I was being too needy, too demanding of their time when they had their own lives to build. The kitchen door frames still bore the pencil marks tracking their heights, Jacob's dramatic growth spurts, Jonathan's steady progression, Rebecca's sudden leap during her 14th year. Those children had felt so real to me. So precious. When had they become strangers? 6 months after Charlie's funeral, the bank statement arrived that changed everything. I'd been avoiding the financial reconciliation, too exhausted by grief to face the numbers. But when I finally spread the documents across my kitchen table, something was wrong. We should have had more money, even after the experimental treatments, even after the funeral expenses. The balance didn't match what I remembered from our last conversation with the financial advisor. I called Jonathan first. He'd been managing our investments during Charlie's illness, a kindness. I'd thought, one less burden when every day felt like drowning. "Mom, I can't discuss your finances with you anymore," he said before I could finish explaining my concerns. "It's a conflict of interest now that Dad's gone. You should hire an independent advisor. But you've been handling our accounts for months." Exactly why I need to step back, for professional reasons. The line went dead, leaving me staring at numbers that didn't add up. Jacob had needed several emergency loans over the past year. His cryptocurrency venture was about to break through, but he needed capital for servers, for marketing, for development costs that seemed to multiply exponentially. I'd transferred the money without question. My son was trying to build a future, and if I could help, why wouldn't I? But now, looking at the bank records, the amount seemed staggering. $73,000 in loans that had never been discussed as loans, never been documented, never been repaid. Rebecca's transformation had been more gradual, but equally expensive. The designer handbags had appeared slowly, explained as investments in her brand. Her lifestyle content was taking off. She'd said, Sponsors were paying for her authentic recommendations of products, restaurants, experiences. When I'd questioned the expensive dinners and weekend trips to the Hamptons, she'd shown me her growing follower count as proof of success. You have to spend money to make money. Mom, this is how influencer marketing works. But the bank records told a different story. Regular transfers to Rebecca's account, always followed within days by purchases that showed up on her Instagram. The expensive skincare routine she'd recommended to her followers, the Chanel handbag she'd unboxed in a video, the weekend in Napa she'd #blessed. All of it funded by transfers from accounts I thought were reserved for Charlie's medical expenses. I sat in my kitchen as afternoon shadows lengthened, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Not just confusion or hurt, but a cold, clarifying suspicion that made me reach for the phone book and look up forensic accountants. Rebecca's engagement announcement came through Instagram, a sunset photo on a yacht, her hand extended to show a diamond that could have financed a car. The caption read, "He said yes, can't wait to marry my best friend, #engaged, #blessed, #yacht life." I learned my daughter was getting married from social media, along with 30,000 strangers. Blake Morrison came from pharmaceutical money. His family owned a chain of specialty clinics across New England. He was handsome in that generic, privileged way Rebecca had always been drawn to. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, the easy confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. When I called to congratulate her, Rebecca sounded distracted, almost annoyed by the interruption. "Oh, hi, Mom. Yeah, we're super excited. Blake's family has this amazing property in the Hamptons. We're thinking fall wedding. Maybe October." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Have you set a date? I'd love to help with planning." "Actually, we've got it covered. Blake's mom knows all the best vendors, and honestly, it's going to be pretty upscale. You don't need to worry about the costs." The words hit like a physical blow. I wasn't worried about cost. I was hoping to be involved. "Mom, you've got enough on your plate with the house sale and everything. We really have this handled." "Rebecca, I'm your mother. I want to help plan your wedding." "Look, I appreciate that, but this is going to be a certain level of event. Blake's family has specific expectations. I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed." The save-the-date card arrived 3 weeks later, after Rebecca had already posted photos of them on her Instagram story. October 15th, at Sunset Vineyard in the Hamptons. The thick cardstock and elegant typography screamed expensive easily, $60,000, maybe 70. I called again, offering to contribute however I could. Rebecca's responses grew shorter, more dismissive. "It's all handled. Mom, Blake's parents are covering everything. Just show up and have fun." But I could hear something else in her voice, the same careful tone Jonathan used when discussing professional boundaries, the same polite distance that had crept into all my children's voices since Charlie's death. I wasn't being protected from wedding stress. I was being managed, handled, kept at arm's length like a problematic relative who might embarrass them in front of Blake's sophisticated family. The wedding was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to figure out why my children were treating me like a stranger, why our accounts were empty, and why I felt like I was drowning in my own family. Patricia Henley's office overlooked Central Park, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that whispered of serious money. The forensic accountant came highly recommended by my lawyer, a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of gentle manner that probably helped her clients absorb devastating news. "Mrs. Tremblay," she said, spreading documents across her conference table, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you may be very difficult to process, but you have a right to know where your money went." The paper trail was meticulous, damning, and heartbreaking. Over the past 3 years, starting just 6 months after Charlie's diagnosis, systematic withdrawals had drained our accounts with surgical precision. Jonathan hadn't just been managing our investments, he'd been redirecting them into an elaborate shell game. Companies with official-sounding names like Hudson Financial Solutions and Empire Investment Group had received transfers totaling $147,000, every single one traced back to addresses registered to Jonathan's business office. "Your son created what we call a family embezzlement scheme," Patricia explained, her voice carefully neutral. "He established legitimate-looking investment opportunities that existed only on paper. The money went directly into accounts he controlled." "But he's a licensed financial advisor. Doesn't that prevent this kind of thing?" "Unfortunately, family members often have access to accounts that wouldn't be available to outside advisors. He exploited your trust and your grief to systematically steal from you." Jacob's situation was more complex, but equally devastating. The $73,000 I'd transferred for his emergency business needs had been converted to various cryptocurrencies and moved to exchanges I had no access to. Worse, credit cards in my name cards I'd never applied for had been used to purchase additional digital assets. "He used your credit profile to access funds without your knowledge," Patricia said gently. "The debt was structured to appear after your husband's death, presumably when you'd be too grief-stricken to notice the irregularities. How is that even possible? He had access to your Social Security number, your financial history, your address. For credit card companies, that's often sufficient, especially when the applicant already has established accounts at the same address. But Rebecca's betrayal cut the deepest. Every aspect of her influencer lifestyle, the cosmetic procedures, the designer clothes, the weekend getaways she'd documented so carefully had been funded by direct transfers from our medical account, the account we'd established specifically for Charlie's treatment. $64,000, Patricia said quietly, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. "Taken from your husband's medical fund while he was fighting for his life." The amounts were itemized with clinical precision. $12,000 for cosmetic procedures she'd documented as self-care content. $6,000 for a Chanel handbag she'd unboxed for her followers. $4,700 for a weekend in Napa that she'd posted about with the hashtag blessed. All of it stolen from the money we'd set aside to save Charlie's life. I sat in that sterile conference room, staring at evidence of my children's calculated betrayal, and felt something fundamental break inside me. Not just heartbreak, I'd expected that, but a cold, clarifying rage that burned away every excuse I'd been making for them. "Mrs. Tremblay," Patricia said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else you need to understand. This wasn't impulsive. The timing, the methods, the coordination this was planned. They waited until you were most vulnerable to take what they wanted. They'd planned this. While I was holding Charlie's hand through chemotherapy, while I was researching clinical trials and fighting insurance companies, my children were systematically stealing our future." That evening, I drove to Vermont. I hadn't seen Oscar Martinez in years, but his number was still in my phone from veterinary school. We'd been close friends then, study partners who'd shared dreams of healing animals and making a difference in rural communities. I'd chosen marriage and children over my career. Oscar had chosen a veterinary practice in the mountains and a life of quiet service to farmers and their animals. "Florence." His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, steady, surprised. "My God, how are you? I heard about Charlie through the alumni newsletter." "I'm so sorry." I broke down then, sitting in my car in his gravel driveway while he stood on his porch in work clothes, having just finished evening rounds. I told him everything: Charlie's death, the children's distance, the devastating betrayal I'd just discovered. "Come inside," he said simply. "You shouldn't be alone with this." Oscar's kitchen was exactly what I'd have expected: simple, functional, filled with the kind of warmth that came from a life lived honestly. He made coffee and listened while I spread Patricia's documents across his wooden table. "I need to understand something," I said when I'd finished the whole story. How did I raise children who could do this? What did I do wrong? Oscar studied the papers for a long moment, his veterinarian's mind processing the systematic nature of the theft. You know what I think, he said finally. I think you love them so completely that you forgot to teach them consequences. Every mistake was cushioned. Every failure was someone else's fault. They learned that love meant never having to face the results of their choices. The words stung because they rang true. How many times had I covered for Jacob's impulsiveness, made excuses for Jonathan's coldness, enabled Rebecca's extravagance? I'd thought I was being a good mother. Instead, I'd been raising predators. Charlie knew. Didn't he? I whispered. Oscar's pause told me everything. He called me about 8 months before he died, said he was worried about the kids, about what would happen to you after he was gone. He could see what they were becoming, but he didn't want to burden you with family drama while you were caring for him. Why didn't he tell me? Because he loved you, and because he hoped they'd change once they realized what they were putting you through. But they hadn't changed. If anything, Charlie's death had accelerated their predatory behavior. With their father gone, I'd become their primary target, easier to manipulate, more vulnerable to guilt, less likely to question their explanations. What are you going to do? Oscar asked. I looked at the evidence spread across his table. Bank statements, transfer records, credit card applications I'd never signed. The systematic destruction of everything Charlie and I had built together. I'm going to Rebecca's wedding, I said quietly. Florence. They're expecting me to show up, smile, and pretend everything is fine. They're expecting me to continue being the convenient mother they can exploit when needed and dismiss when inconvenient. I gathered the papers into neat stacks. They're expecting me to stay silent about what they've done. Oscar's eyes searched my face. And what are you actually going to do? For the first time in months, I smiled. A real smile. Not the polite mask I'd been wearing since Charlie's funeral. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. The week before the wedding, I tried one last time to reach each of my children, not to confront them, not yet, but to give them a chance to explain, to confess, to show some glimmer of remorse that might change what I was planning to do. Jonathan answered my call with his professional voice, the tone he used for difficult clients. Mom, I told you before, I can't discuss financial matters with you anymore. It creates ethical complications. This isn't about financial advice. Jonathan, this is about the money you took from our family trust. Silence stretched between us like a held breath. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. You've been under tremendous stress since Dad died. Maybe you should consider talking to someone about these concerns. Hudson Financial Solutions, Jonathan, Empire Investment Group. Should I continue? Another pause. I think you're confused about some legitimate investment strategies I implemented. I have clients waiting. We'll have to discuss this later. The line went dead. Jacob was more direct when I confronted him about the credit cards and cryptocurrency purchases. Look, Mom, you weren't using that credit capacity anyway. And crypto is the future. I was actually trying to help secure your retirement. If you'd just been patient, we could have made a fortune together. With my money, Jacob, money you took without asking. Borrowed. Mom, I would have paid it back once my platform took off. You never gave me a chance to explain the full vision. His voice carried that familiar mix of enthusiasm and defensiveness that had charmed me through countless childhood schemes. Besides, traditional investment advisors like Jonathan don't understand disruptive technologies. I was protecting you from his conservative approach. He spoke as if theft became legitimate when wrapped in entrepreneurial language, as if my objections were simply failure to understand his brilliance. Jacob, you used my credit to buy digital currency I can't access. How is that helping me? Because you don't understand the technology. Mom, I was going to transfer your share once the value increased. You're thinking like Dad, too risk-averse to see real opportunities. The casual invocation of Charlie's name, the implication that my dead husband had been the obstacle to my financial success, left me speechless. Rebecca was the hardest to reach. When she finally answered my call, wedding stress had sharpened her voice to a blade. "Mom, I'm really busy with final preparations. Blake's family has a million last-minute details, and I need to focus. What do you need?" "I need to understand why you took money from Dad's medical account." "What are you talking about? I haven't taken anything from anyone." $64,000, Rebecca, for cosmetic procedures and luxury purchases while your father was dying. The silence that followed felt different from Jonathan's calculated pauses or Jacob's defensive scrambling. This was the silence of someone rapidly recalculating their story. "Those were business investments," she said finally. "My influencer career requires certain presentation standards. You wouldn't understand the economics of personal branding. I understand that you used money meant to save your father's life to buy handbags for Instagram videos. That's not look. The medical expenses were covered by insurance. That money wasn't being used anyway. I was building something that could support our whole family long term." "Our family? You mean the family you've been avoiding since Dad died?" "I haven't been avoiding anyone. I've been building a career while dealing with my own grief. Maybe if you supported my goals instead of questioning every decision I make, we'd have a better relationship." The conversation's final exchange crystallized everything I needed to know. "Rebecca, your father is dead. You stole money from his medical fund. Don't you feel any guilt about that?" "Mom, you need to stop living in the past and start thinking about the future. Dad's gone. Nothing's going to bring him back. At least I'm trying to build something positive from this situation." She hung up. I sat in Oscar's guest room, staring at my phone, finally understanding that my children weren't going to confess, apologize, or feel remorse. In their minds, they'd done nothing wrong. I was the problem, the inconvenient mother who didn't understand their sophisticated financial strategies, their business investments, their forward-thinking approaches to wealth building. The wedding was in 4 days. They expected me to arrive quietly, sit in the back, and smile for photos like a prop in Rebecca's perfect day. But I'd stopped being that woman. Sunset Vineyard was exactly what I'd expected, rolling hills dotted with perfectly manicured vines, a stone mansion that looked like it had been imported from Tuscany, and enough Edison bulb lighting to power a small town. I parked my modest Honda between a Maserati and a Tesla, feeling the weight of judgment from valets who probably earned more than my annual income. The guest list read like a social register. Blake's family had invited pharmaceutical executives, country club presidents, and at least 2 people I recognized from financial news programs. My seating assignment told me everything I needed to know about my place in Rebecca's New World Table 12. In the back corner with college acquaintances and distant relatives, tables 1 through 4 were reserved for family Blake's parents, siblings, and cousins, along with my sons, apparently. Being Rebecca's mother no longer qualified me for family status. During the cocktail hour, I watched my children work the crowd with practiced ease. Jonathan held court near the bar, impressing Blake's groomsmen with stories of his financial expertise and client successes. Several men handed him business cards, potential clients who had no idea they were talking to someone who'd embezzled from his own mother. Jacob had cornered a group of tech entrepreneurs near the Raw Bar, pitching his cryptocurrency platform with evangelical fervor. His enthusiasm was infectious. I could see checkbooks metaphorically opening as he painted visions of revolutionary blockchain applications and democratized finance. Rebecca floated between groups in her custom gown, every movement calculated for maximum visual impact. Her photographer followed discreetly, capturing candid moments that would become content for her Instagram story. The dress alone probably cost more than most people's annual salaries funded. I knew now, by money stolen from her dying father's medical account, none of them approached me. Not once during the 90-minute cocktail reception did any of my children acknowledge my presence beyond the briefest nod when they first spotted me. I was invisible, irrelevant, an embarrassing reminder of a past they'd rather forget. I found myself studying Blake's family, trying to understand what they saw when they looked at the Tremblays. Jonathan appeared successful, polished, the kind of financial advisor wealthy families trusted with their portfolios. Jacob seemed brilliant and innovative, a young entrepreneur on the verge of breakthrough success. Rebecca looked like the perfect pharmaceutical heiress, beautiful, sophisticated, socially media savvy. And I looked like exactly what I was, a recently widowed woman in a modest dress from Nordstrom Rack, driving a 10-year-old car and living in a one-bedroom apartment because her children had stolen her financial security. During dinner, the conversation at my assigned table was polite but distant. Rebecca's college friends made appropriate small talk about how proud I must be, how beautiful the wedding was, how perfect Rebecca and Blake seemed together. They had no idea they were talking to a woman whose daughter had just publicly humiliated her in front of 200 strangers. Because that's when Rebecca decided to make her toast. Rebecca's speech began exactly as I'd expected. She thanked Blake's family for welcoming her, praised her new husband's kindness and success, and spoke about dreams finally coming true. Her delivery was flawless, the practiced performance of someone who'd spent years curating her image for public consumption. But then her tone shifted, and she looked directly at me across the crowded reception hall. "Some people might wonder why my father isn't here to walk me down the aisle tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "He died 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. And unfortunately, my mother made some very poor financial decisions during his illness." The words hit like physical blows. Around me, guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether this was part of the planned program. "She was selfish and desperate," Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She spent every penny Dad left us on experimental treatments that everyone knew wouldn't work, and now she expects us to clean up her financial mess." I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting for my reaction. I want to make it crystal clear that this wedding, this life I'm building with Blake, none of it has anything to do with her poor choices. My brothers and I have had to build our futures despite our mother's financial irresponsibility. She raised her champagne glass toward me, a toast that felt more like a public execution. So tonight, as we celebrate new beginnings, I'm grateful for the family that matters, Blake's family, who understand the value of smart financial planning and supporting the people you love. The applause was scattered, uncomfortable. People weren't sure if they should clap for what sounded like a public disowning of her own mother. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She walked across the room, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor, and stopped directly in front of my table. Without a word, she leaned down and slapped me across the face hard enough to make my ears ring. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests frozen in shock, waiting to see how the humiliated mother would respond. Instead of crying or fleeing or making a scene, I laughed. A quiet, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including myself. "Now I understand," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stillness. I stood up, smoothed my modest dress, and walked to the microphone Rebecca had abandoned at the head table. The room watched in complete silence as I adjusted the height and smiled at the sea of shocked faces staring back at me. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter's wedding," I began, my voice calm and steady. "Since Rebecca has chosen to make this evening about family finances, I think it's only fair that everyone understands the complete picture." I could see Blake's parents exchanging panicked glances, his mother's hand moving protectively to her pearl necklace. This wasn't the kind of family drama pharmaceutical money was comfortable with. "My daughter is absolutely correct about one thing," I continued. I did spend our family savings trying to save my husband's life, every penny of it. It was the best investment I ever made because it gave us 2 more precious years together. Rebecca was shaking her head frantically, but Blake had moved away from her, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. What Rebecca hasn't mentioned is where her money has been coming from since then. You see, I've spent the last month working with a forensic accountant, and we've uncovered some very interesting financial transactions. The room had gone completely still. Even the waitstaff had stopped serving, sensing the dramatic shift in the evening's trajectory. My daughter, who just called me financially irresponsible, has spent $64,000 from her father's medical fund on cosmetic procedures and luxury purchases for her social media career. While her father was dying, she was using his treatment money to buy handbags for Instagram videos. Rebecca was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation, of exposure, of consequences finally catching up with careful lies. My son Jonathan, the financial advisor, embezzled $147,000 from our family trust through fake investment companies. And Jacob used my credit to purchase cryptocurrency worth $73,000 digital currency I have no access to and never authorized. Blake's face had gone ashen. He was staring at Rebecca like he'd never seen her before, and in many ways, he hadn't. The woman he'd fallen in love with was a carefully constructed fiction funded by stolen money and family betrayal. So yes, Rebecca, you're absolutely right. This wedding, this life you're building, has nothing to do with me, because I'm done being your bank account, your safety net, and your convenient target for manipulation. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Blake's father stood up immediately, his voice cutting through the shocked murmurs. "I think this celebration has come to an end," he announced with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling situations. "We'll be in touch with appropriate parties tomorrow." The exodus began before he finished speaking. Guests grabbed purses and jackets, whispering urgently as they headed for the exits. Phone cameras appeared, recording the final moments of what would become one of the most discussed wedding disasters in Hampton's history. Blake pulled Rebecca aside, his voice low, but his body language broadcasting disgust and betrayal. I could hear fragments of their conversation. $64,000 from your father's medical fund. Blake, please, I can explain. When exactly were you planning to tell me what kind of person I was marrying? Jonathan had his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his lawyer, while Jacob stood frozen in the middle of the emptying dance floor, his face cycling through expressions of rage and panic. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, Rebecca broke away from Blake and approached me one final time. "Mom," she whispered, mascara streaming down her cheeks, "how could you do this to me? Today of all days." I looked at my daughter, this beautiful stranger who'd grown from the baby I'd nursed, the toddler I'd chased, the teenager I'd worried about, and felt nothing but a profound sadness for who she'd chosen to become. "The same way you could steal from your dying father," I said quietly. "The same way you could slap me in front of 200 people. The same way you could stand at your wedding and call me selfish for trying to save the man who gave you life." She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. "I raised you better than this," I said, turning to leave. "All of you. I taught you to be kind, to be grateful, to protect the people who love you. Instead, you became predators who saw my love as weakness to exploit." I walked out of that reception hall and felt something break free inside my chest, not my heart, but the chains that had bound me to people who had never deserved my devotion. The drive back to Vermont felt like emerging from underwater. I'd spent so many years focused on being the perfect mother, the supportive wife, the selfless caregiver, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply breathe without the weight of other people's expectations crushing my chest. Oscar was waiting on his porch when I arrived at nearly midnight, as if he'd known exactly when I'd need him. "How did it go?" he asked, handing me coffee and settling beside me in his wooden chairs. "Better than they deserved," I said. "Worse than I'd hoped." Over the following days and weeks, the fallout unfolded with brutal efficiency. Blake called off the wedding within hours, his family's lawyers already drafting documents to recover wedding expenses and engagement gifts. Rebecca's carefully curated social media empire collapsed as followers discovered the truth behind her lifestyle. Comment sections filled with accusations and disgust from people who'd trusted her recommendations. Jonathan's financial consulting business hemorrhaged clients once word spread through professional networks about his embezzlement from family members. Who could trust a financial advisor who'd stolen from his own mother Jacob's cryptocurrency venture, imploded when potential investors learned about his fraudulent funding methods? My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my children. Angry voicemails became tearful pleas, became threats of legal action. I listened to the first few, then stopped. Their words followed predictable patterns: deny, attack, play victim, demand forgiveness without accountability. "Do you want to respond to any of them?" Oscar asked one evening as we walked his property lines, checking on cattle in the fading light. "No," I said, feeling something settle into place inside my chest. "They want me to engage so they can manipulate me back into the role of the forgiving mother. But that woman is gone." Oscar had offered me more than shelter. He'd offered partnership in his veterinary practice, in the life he'd built on this farm, in a future based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. For the first time in decades, someone was asking what I wanted instead of demanding what I could give. "I have a proposition," he'd said during my second week there. "The county's been pressuring me to find a partner, someone to help with large animal calls, maybe take over some of the routine work. I'm getting too old to be wrestling bulls at 3 a.m. I'd laughed despite everything. "You're 55, Oscar. Hardly ancient. Old enough to know what I want," he'd said quietly. "And what I want is for you to stay. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm helping out of pity. As my partner in the practice, and if you're willing, in everything else." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I hadn't practiced veterinary medicine in 30 years, hadn't thought of myself as anything other than a wife and mother for decades. But sitting on Oscar's porch, looking out over land that stretched to the horizon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years possibility. I wasn't just counting down days until death anymore. I was planning for a future built on my own terms, my own choices, my own values. The licensing process would take months, the continuing education longer still, but for the first time since Charlie's diagnosis, I had something to look forward to beyond mere survival. The call came 8 months later, while I was assisting Oscar with a difficult calving at the Morrison farm. Rebecca's voice was small, frightened nothing like the confident influencer who'd humiliated me at her failed wedding. "Mom, I'm at the hospital." "I'm having complications with the pregnancy. The doctors say there might be problems. I need you." I found her in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, looking fragile and pale against crisp white sheets. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with stress. "You came," she whispered when she saw me, tears starting immediately. I pulled up a chair, but remained standing. "What's the medical situation?" She blinked, clearly expecting a different conversation. "I'm at 32 weeks. They're worried about preeclampsia. My blood pressure is too high, and there's protein in my urine. They might have to deliver early." I spent an hour reviewing her chart, consulting with her obstetrician, and ensuring she was receiving appropriate care. The preeclampsia was mild, manageable with proper monitoring. She was in no immediate danger, nor was the baby. "Your medical team is competent," I told her when I returned. "You'll be fine if you follow their instructions." "Will you stay?" she asked. And for a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "No. I don't understand. You're my mother. You're supposed to forgive me. I'm your mother." I agreed. Which means I taught you right from wrong. I gave you every opportunity to be a decent human being. You chose something else. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Mom, wait. What about the baby? What about your grandchild? I paused in the doorway without turning around. When that child is born, if you want them to know me, you can call. But understand this, Rebecca, I will not enable your behavior anymore. I will not fund your lifestyle, clean up your messes, or pretend that what you did was forgivable just because we share DNA. But we're family, she whispered. No, I said, finally turning to look at her one last time. Family doesn't steal from each other while someone is dying. Family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard. Family doesn't humiliate each other in public and call it love. I walked out of that hospital room and felt something break free inside my chest, not my heart, but the chains that had bound me to people who had never deserved my devotion. 1 year after Rebecca's failed wedding, I married Oscar in a quiet ceremony at the Vermont courthouse. There were no guests, no reception, no social media announcements, just two people who'd found each other after decades of waiting, choosing love built on respect rather than exploitation. We drove home to our farm, officially ours now. The paper signed that morning, making me a full partner in both the veterinary practice and the property. The autumn maples blazed red and gold around us, and I thought about cycles, about things dying and being reborn, about how sometimes you have to let old growth burn away completely before anything new can take root. My phone had been quiet for months. The legal consequences had finally caught up with my children. Jacob faced federal charges for wire fraud, his cryptocurrency schemes having attracted FBI attention when other victims came forward. Jonathan's embezzlement had cost him his license and his business. He'd moved to Florida to escape his reputation. But financial crimes had a way of following you. Rebecca had given birth to a daughter alone. After Blake's paternity test confirmed what everyone suspected. She'd been evicted from her apartment and was moving between friends' couches, her influencer career destroyed by the scandal. I felt no satisfaction in their downfalls, but no guilt either. They were facing the natural consequences of choices they'd made as adults, consequences I'd protected them from for too long. Any regrets? Oscar asked as we cleaned up after delivering twin calves on our wedding night, not traditionally romantic, but perfect for us, about marrying you or cutting them out of my life. Either, both. I considered this, watching the sunrise paint the Vermont hills gold through the barn windows. Regret implies I had other viable options. What was I supposed to do? Keep funding Rebecca's lifestyle while she called me selfish. Keep pretending Jonathan's embezzlement was a misunderstanding. Keep making excuses for Jacob while he stole my credit cards. You could have forgiven them. I could have enabled them, I corrected. There's a difference. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls, not to my children, but to the IRS, the New York Attorney General's office, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I provided them with everything Patricia had uncovered: tax evasion, elder financial abuse, interstate wire fraud. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was ensuring they couldn't do this to anyone else. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded from my old address in Westchester, Jacob's handwriting, careful and uncertain on the prison letterhead. Dear Mom, I know I have no right to contact you after what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't give you back the money I stole or the trust I broke. But I need you to know that I understand now what I took from you, not just money, but security, dignity, the future you and Dad worked 30 years to build. I'm in federal prison now, as you probably know. 18 months for wire fraud, with 3 years probation after. It's given me time to think about who I became and why. The therapist here says I was using your love as a weapon against you, taking advantage of your kindness because I knew you'd always forgive me. She's right. I knew you'd never cut me off completely. So I kept pushing boundaries, kept taking more, kept telling myself I deserved it because I was your son. I convinced myself that your money was really my inheritance anyway. So what difference did it make if I took it early? I was wrong about everything. I wasn't a visionary entrepreneur. I was a thief who stole from the woman who gave me life, who sacrificed everything for her children, who deserved better than what we gave her. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I remember the mother who taught me to be better than what I became. And I'm trying, slowly, to become the man you raised me to be before I lost my way. Jonathan is here, too different facility, but we talk sometimes. He's angry, says you destroyed our family by exposing us. He doesn't understand that we destroyed it ourselves years ago. Rebecca writes occasionally. She's struggling, working retail, trying to raise her daughter alone. She still doesn't think she did anything wrong. If someday, when I've proven through actions instead of words that I've changed, you might consider letting me try to make amends. I'll spend every day working to deserve that chance. But I understand if that day never comes. Your son, if you'll still claim me. Jacob. I set the letter on Oscar's kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, exactly, but possibility. The difference between the Jacob who had stolen from me and the one who had written this letter was accountability. For the first time, one of my children had acknowledged not just what they'd done, but why it was wrong. "What do you think?" Oscar asked, reading over my shoulder. "I think," I said slowly, "that maybe there's a difference between setting boundaries and closing doors forever." But accountability was just the beginning. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. It would take years of consistent action, of proving that change was real and lasting. I didn't respond to the letter immediately. If Jacob was serious about change, he'd understand that reconciliation couldn't be rushed or demanded. It had to be earned, piece by careful piece. That evening, Oscar and I sat on our porch watching the sunset paint our fields gold. In the distance, cattle were settling for the night, and closer by, barn cats were beginning their evening hunt. It was a good life, built on honest work and mutual respect, the kind of love that didn't demand sacrifice of one's self-worth. "I've been thinking about boundaries," I said. "About the difference between cutting people off and protecting yourself." Oscar waited, understanding that I needed to work through this aloud. For 30 years, I thought being a good mother meant never saying no, never letting my children face consequences, never requiring them to treat me with respect. I thought love meant absorption, absorbing their mistakes, their cruelty, their selfishness. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. "But that wasn't love," I continued. "That was fear. Fear that if I demanded better, they'd leave. Fear that if I set boundaries, they'd choose someone else to be their mother. And instead, they became people who couldn't love anyone because they'd never learned that love requires respect, reciprocity, accountability." My phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca, still trying to find ways around my boundaries. I glanced at it, then set the phone aside without reading it. "The tragedy isn't that I cut them off," I said. "The tragedy is that I never taught them how to love someone without using them." But Jacob's letter suggested the possibility of change, of growth, of relationship built on respect rather than exploitation. Not now, perhaps not for years, but someday. "Would you consider seeing him eventually?" Oscar asked. "Maybe, when he's proven through actions, not words, that he understands what family actually means, when he can offer relationship instead of manipulation." The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, I heard an owl call and its mate respond to conversation in the night. Connection based on mutual recognition and respect. I'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all, but addiction. that family built on guilt and obligation would always crumble, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was step back and let people face the consequences of their choices. But I'd also learned that boundaries could protect the possibility of genuine relationship rather than destroying it. That accountability could be the foundation of redemption, that forgiveness and trust were different things, and both had to be earned through consistent action over time. At 55, I discovered that life could begin again after betrayal, that love could bloom in the ashes of exploitation, that justice and mercy could coexist when tempered with wisdom. Oscar squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for this man who'd waited 30 years to love me properly, who'd shown me that partnership meant protection rather than predation. The evening air carried the scent of hay and approaching autumn. Tomorrow we'd be back to work helping farmers, delivering calves, mending what could be mended. It was honest work, meaningful work, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. It was a life I'd chosen for myself, on my own terms, with my own values as the foundation. And for the first time in my adult life, I was completely free to choose my relationships, free to set my standards, free to love without losing myself in the process. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, marking time in a universe where consequences and redemption, justice and mercy, love and boundaries could all coexist if we were wise enough to understand the difference. I was finally completely free.